We call them tribes. But that word carries almost none of the weight of what these societies actually were. Nations with constitutions, cities with trade routes, confederacies with laws older than most European kingdoms. To call them tribes is to begin with the wrong word. And beginning with the wrong word means the whole story comes out wrong. Around the year 1000, in the woodlands of what is now upstate New York and southern Ontario, something remarkable was taking shape. 5 nations, the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca were ending generations of conflict and building something new. Not a temporary alliance, not a loose coalition, a governing confederation bound by a shared constitution, transmitted orally and encoded in wampum belts. This was the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Iroquois League, and it would become one of the most sophisticated political systems in the pre-colonial Americas. This moment matters because it challenges the most persistent assumption about Indigenous North America, that these were simple, disconnected communities living without structure or governance. The Haudenosaunee had both, in abundance, and they were not alone. Across the continent, hundreds of distinct nations had developed their own systems of government, trade, land use, and law. The story of Indigenous North America is not a story of one people. It is a story of extraordinary diversity, political, cultural, linguistic, and geographic. Understanding this is not just historical accuracy. It is the foundation for understanding everything that followed. Let us stay for a moment with the Haudenosaunee. Their political system was built around a central council where representatives from all 5 nations deliberated together. Decisions required consensus, not majority rule. This was not a quick process. It was a careful one designed to prevent any single nation from dominating the others. Leadership was not inherited through a male line. Clan mothers held the authority to appoint and remove chiefs. Women were the political foundation of the system, holding power through their control of lineage, household, and ultimately, governance. The Haudenosaunee Longhouse, the physical structure that gave their confederacy its name, was more than a dwelling. It was a symbol of political unity. Each nation occupied a metaphorical position within the Longhouse. From the eastern door to the western, every family knew its place. Every individual belonged. Now move west into the Great Plains. Before the arrival of the horse, brought by the Spanish in the 1500s, plains nations like the Mandan and the Hidatsa were primarily agricultural. Living in permanent earth lodge villages along the Missouri River, they cultivated corn, squash, and sunflowers. They traded with nomadic groups for meat and hides. Their villages were economic hubs, drawing trade from across the continent. Move further into the Pacific Northwest. Here, the Tlingit, Haida, and Coast Salish lived in one of the most resource-rich environments on Earth. The annual salmon run provided more protein than many agricultural societies could produce. This abundance allowed for permanent villages, complex social hierarchies, and the development of art traditions, totem poles, carved canoes, woven blankets that encoded history, lineage, and spiritual belief in visual form. Each of these societies was adapted to its particular landscape. Each had developed over centuries the knowledge and systems necessary to thrive in environments as different as Arctic tundra, temperate rainforest, desert plateau, and tall grass prairie. This was not survival by accident. It was civilization by design. The arrival of Europeans did not change everything at once. It changed everything gradually. Then, catastrophically, the first wave was invisible. Diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, spread ahead of direct contact, carried along trade routes by people who had encountered Europeans on the coasts. By some estimates, up to 90% of some populations died within a century of first exposure. Leaders died without successors. Knowledge systems collapsed when the elders who held them were gone. Political alliances fractured under the pressure of sudden, inexplicable loss. The second wave was material. European goods, metal tools, firearms, horses entered indigenous trade networks and restructured them. Some nations gained enormous advantage from early access to these materials. Others fell behind. Existing rivalries were amplified. New conflicts emerged over control of trade routes and access to European allies. The third wave was territorial. As European settlements expanded, the pressure on land intensified. Nations were pushed from their territories. Some adapted, relocating, allying with European powers, transforming their economies. Others resisted through warfare, diplomacy, and legal challenges. Each of these waves affected different nations differently. There was no single indigenous response to European contact because there was no single indigenous experience of it. Some nations were devastated within decades. Others maintained sovereignty for centuries. The myth that persists is this, that indigenous peoples shared a single, unified culture, a generic Native American identity defined by feathered headdresses, teepees, and spiritual connection to nature. This image is not only inaccurate, it is a compression of hundreds of distinct cultures into a single, manageable stereotype. The reality is that pre-colonial North America contained more linguistic diversity than all of Europe. The political systems ranged from egalitarian bands to hereditary chiefdoms to democratic confederacies. The architectural traditions ranged from earth lodges to multi-story stone pueblos to portable skin dwellings. The spiritual practices ranged from animism rooted in local geography to complex cosmologies involving creation narratives, celestial observation, and elaborate ceremonial calendars. These were not variations on a single theme. They were entirely different civilizations, shaped by entirely different environments and histories. The stereotype emerged partly from early European observers who lacked the knowledge to distinguish between cultures, and partly from political convenience. It is easier to displace one people than hundreds of distinct nations, each with their own claims, their own governance, their own identities. The lasting impact is that this flattening continues today. It shapes how Indigenous history is taught, how Indigenous people are represented in media, and how their contemporary political claims are understood. Here is what we are rarely told. Many features of American democracy have roots in Indigenous political thought. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy's system of representative governance, separation of powers, and consensus-based decision-making was observed and discussed by several of the founders of the United States. Benjamin Franklin referenced the Iroquois model in his writings on colonial union. The Albany Plan of 1754, an early proposal for unifying the colonies, was directly influenced by discussions with Haudenosaunee leaders. This is not a fringe claim. It is a documented part of the historical record, acknowledged by scholars across disciplines. The Haudenosaunee themselves have long pointed to this connection, noting that the Great Law of Peace, the oral constitution of the Confederacy, predates the United States Constitution by several centuries. The idea that democracy arrived in America with European settlers ignores the fact that democratic governance had been practiced here in sophisticated forms long before any European colony existed. Today, there are over 500 federally recognized indigenous nations in the United States alone, and over 600 First Nations in Canada. These are not historical artifacts. They are functioning governments with their own legal systems, educational institutions, economic development agencies, and cultural preservation programs. Indigenous languages that were nearly erased through boarding school policies are being revitalized. Young people are learning languages their grandparents were punished for speaking. Cultural practices that were banned for decades are being reclaimed and performed openly. And in courts and legislatures, Indigenous nations continue to assert treaty rights, land claims, and sovereignty, winning significant legal victories that reshape the political landscape of North America. Understanding the diversity and complexity of pre-colonial Indigenous societies is not just about correcting the historical record. It is about recognizing the full weight of what was disrupted, what was lost, and what has endured. And what has endured is considerable. We call them tribes, but they were nations, confederacies, civilizations, and the descendants of those nations are still here, governing, building, remembering, and insisting that the wrong word is never quite enough. If this changed how you think about Indigenous North America, consider following for more histories told with the complexity they deserve.